You know, it's been a long time since I've talked about music on my channel. Probably been a few years even. But today I want to change that. And I want to do a Slayer tier list. I know, everybody's done one. I think mine might be a little bit interesting though. I think I have a couple curveballs to throw at people. I've been in the mood to listen to Slayer for the past few weeks now. And I was just like, man, I gotta rank these albums. I gotta tell people what I think about Slayer. Now, I do want to say, when I do my tier lists, I am mostly coming at this from a personal opinion sort of viewpoint. I'm not really going to talk too much about legacy, or at least I'm not going to let legacy dictate how I feel about an album. Legacy is obviously very important, but I don't think that is the number one argument. It really should just be about whether you like the music or you don't. So, that's like my only rule that I do with tier lists. Anyways though, let's get started with Show No Mercy. Now this easily, in my opinion, is an A tier album. This might be a little odd for some people. Maybe putting it that high might be a little too strong, but me personally, I've always loved Show No Mercy. Sure, not every song is a Stone Cold classic, but it is one of those albums where every song fits perfectly onto the album. Some of the best songs of Slayer's catalog are on this album. The Antichrist and Die by the Sword. There's some underrated classics on here too, like Face the Slayer, and I think Evil Has No Boundaries is a great song. They also have Fight Till Death on here, which, weirdly enough, I went and saw Slayer live a while ago, and they played Fight Till Death, and it was such a weird curveball. I would never thought I'd hear that live, and I got to hear it live, and I was like, that's pretty cool. They still remember this album, and they're not just playing, Antichrist or Die by the Sword. They sometimes will throw some screwballs in there, and I like that a lot. The production on this album is rough to say the least, but I'm fine with that. I like how rough it sounds. I like that it does sound rough and muted to listen to, but the energy is there. It does not really matter. You could listen to these songs on a demo and probably still have a good time listening to it. I think that covers Show No Mercy. This album was also very instrumental in influencing a lot of black metal and death metal. For, number one, its production, but also for the speed and the ferocity of it. So, that's Show No Mercy. I guess we'll just move on to their next album, which was Hell Awaits. So, Hell Awaits, I also put an A tier. I think it's a solid album, and the production is definitely better on here, but it still feels a bit murky, but in a good way. It has personality. It doesn't have to be super clean to listen. You can just have a blast with the way it is. There's only 7 songs on this album, but most of them are fairly lengthy, especially At Dawn They Sleep. That is probably the best song from this record, aside from the title track, which, they still play that live, which was always a pleasure to see that. Hell Awaits. It's one of those albums that's kind of forgotten, I feel like. I don't think this is not one of those albums that people think of right away. They think of a couple other ones. And the one they think of immediately is their next album, Rain and Blood. I mean, is there any chance that Rain and Blood is not going to be an S tier album? I know I've mentioned this story before on the channel, but I'll mention it again. So the first time I ever heard Rain and Blood, I was in class in school, and I just threw it on. It was like, free period or whatever. Starts with Angel of Death, and it's, just a crushing song. We get to Raining Blood, and I'm thinking like, man, like that was pretty damn fast. Like, I wonder how much time has passed. I look up at the clock, and there's still another whole half hour of class left. Like, it was mind-blowing to me how the songs on Rain and Blood are so fast, and it's their shortest album to date. It doesn't even crack 29 minutes. And Angel of Death and Raining Blood take up almost a third of the whole runtime. You know, you get songs like Necrophobic, which are like a minute and 40 seconds of pure fury. And that's what makes it awesome. Some people complain that some of the songs on Rain and Blood maybe sound the same. I don't personally agree with that, but I guess, you know, when songs are playing so fast, maybe for some people it could mold together. Aside from Angel of Death and Raining Blood, there's also classics like Altar of Sacrifice, Postmortem, Criminally Insane, Epidemic. There's a lot of good stuff on here. Yeah. This is genuinely regarded by a lot of people as being the best metal album ever made. It's certainly up there. But I think there's an even better Slayer album. But it's not their next album. South of Heaven. South of Heaven is also an A-tier album. I know we're hanging hard on that A-tier right now. At the time, people thought it wasn't that good. You hear these reviews for back in the day, and people did not like South of Heaven. They thought it was almost Slayer selling out, which, you know, I've never really agreed with the whole selling out argument. For the most part, I don't know. I don't really see Slayer selling out whatsoever. So it was very interesting when you look at reviews at the time when it first came out to now, because now South of Heaven, everyone agrees that it's only gotten better over time. And sure, maybe if you first heard it back in the day, you might have put it in C tier because, well, it doesn't have the ferocity that the first three albums had. You know, there wasn't as much guitar distortion. Everything sounds a little bit cleaner. They toned down the pace a little bit. I don't think these are bad things at all. In fact, I think if your only focus is to play fast and you don't really want to do anything else, I think that pigeonholes a lot of artists, and it even pigeonholes Slayer a couple times in their career. There's a lot of songs on South of Heaven that you still hear live, like Mandatory Suicide, the title track. I will say though, this is probably my least favorite of the first 5 albums. I do think that there are a couple songs on here like Cleanse the Soul and their cover of Dissident Aggressor by Judas Priest. Not quite there. Not quite that great. Still, I think everything else around it is so strong to keep it in A tier. This is an album that I love going back to all the time. And it was one of those albums that when I was growing up, I always liked it. Like, I never had this initial reaction to South of Heaven where it's like, this is too different, I don't like it. I've always been very consistent with this album. It's always been a classic for me and, well, for many people out there. So I said that Rain and Blood is not the best Slayer record. And that's because this one is. Seasons in the Abyss is the best Slayer album, bar none. It took everything that was great about Rain and Blood and South of Heaven and mixes it into a perfect album. This is, you know, like, you will hear me talk about this with some bands, that some bands just have perfect albums. This is a perfect album. Seasons in the Abyss, it was my first Slayer record, and my God, the first time I heard War Ensemble, I could not believe it. It was so fast, so heavy, and it just blew my fucking balls off. But this album has a lot of tricks up its sleeve. It has Dead Skin Mask, Skeletons of Society, and the title track, which has one of the coolest music videos ever. And frankly, there's not one song on Seasons in the Abyss that I ever feel like skipping. Some people might look at something like Temptation, maybe Born of Fire, and think to themselves, that's not that great. I personally disagree. This album is pure bliss from front to back. And it's easily my most played Slayer album. You know, if I ever get the feeling, the itch to listen to Slayer, there's a high probability this is going to be the first record. So, after 5 albums, most people would consider these albums to just be the pantheon of greatness for any metal band. And then we get to Divine Intervention. A lot of people have a lot of hard feelings towards Divine Intervention. I rank this right in the middle. I wouldn't say it's a bad album by any means, but it does have some problems. The production on this album is certainly mixed improperly. There's times where Tom's vocals are almost muted, put into the background when they should really be in the foreground. Sometimes the kick drums don't sound quite right. It feels like some of it is not quite there. The band themselves have said that they'd like to go over Divine Intervention. If they could come over some of these tracks, maybe touch up the production, it would be received a lot better. And I agree, because while I think there are some great songs on here, it's Killing Fields, Ditto Head, 213 are like the 3 songs that I immediately think of really enjoying. I also think of songs like Divine Intervention, which is the title track. And Divine Intervention feels like it's trying to be Seasons in the Abyss 2.0. The problem with it is it's not. It's not a bad song, but you go through all this build-up with it, and it feels like this is going to be sick. But when the main riff kicks in and when the vocals kick in, it's just a missed opportunity. There are some other songs like SS3, which I like a lot. But then there's like Mind Control and Fictional Reality. These songs are kind of This album gets a bad rap. A lot of people will look at Divine Intervention and think, well, this is when things start going downhill for Slayer. I disagree. I don't think we're there yet. But it is an album that I encourage people to listen to again. And, if you're a hater of the album, at the very least, check out 213. Some people might be wondering why I'm even including this record. This is Undisputed Attitude. It is for the most part, a covers album. And a lot of people seem to have a lot of animosity towards that. I guess people didn't want a covers album. They wanted a new album. But honestly, I think this is a pretty fucking sick record. People talk about how it's not proper Slayer, which is really weird to me because I mentioned songs like Necrophobic before, which, all you have to do is just change some lyrics and you can totally make that into a punk song. Punk is baked into Slayer's DNA. It was baked into thrash metal. The thing I like a lot about this album is that it introduced me to a lot of different punk bands and a lot of different punk songs. This is where I first heard Richard Hung himself. And I like punk a lot. I definitely like thrash metal more. I just think the musicianship is 10 times better in thrash than punk. But it's cool to see where Slayer was getting their influences from. And a lot of metal bands got their influences from hardcore punk or just punk. And you're not going to hear like the Ramones covered on this album. You're getting into the deep underground punk. You're getting into the deep underground punk roots, which I appreciate a lot. I think it's a pretty damn good album, and and it has one of the coolest Slayer songs on it, and it's called Gemini. It's like this sludge metal song. It's pretty interesting. Something that Slayer would probably need to touch up a little bit, because these next few albums, it gets kind of bleak. The next one being Diabolus in Musica. Now, I'll be honest, I stayed away from this album for the longest time. I never heard this album growing up. I thought, I had heard that it was just a dog shit album. I've seen it on top 10 worst metal albums. And you know what? People are gonna think I'm mentally ill. But, It's not great. I'll admit it. It's not great. But I don't think it's one of the worst albums ever. See, I mentioned a sellout earlier with South of Heaven. Some people think that Slayer sold out with Diabolus and Musica because it has some nu metal twinge in it. You hear nu metal and Slayer and you thinking to yourself, like, you know, the first time I ever heard this, I wanted to stay away from it because I'm like, well, I don't want Slayer to be doing, like, rap metal. Like, I don't mind nu metal, but I don't think that doesn't fit Slayer whatsoever. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But I listened to this for the first time literally a couple days ago. Like I said, it's not great. It's quite frankly kind of just boring, if more than anything. I don't think it is this genuinely awful album. But yeah, you know, I'm not a fan of the production on this album. It really does not do it for me. The kick drums especially, it just feels wrong. Is there really more for me to say? Like, I think for the most part, it's just boring. Like, there's nothing on there where I was listening to it and I was like, I gotta turn this off. This is just awful. No, for the most part, it was just kind of boring. So, that's Diabolus and Musica. One of those records that I think it's overhated, but I'm never going to go back to it. So next, we have God Hates Us All. What a fucking title for an album. Title alone, just naming it on the title, instant S tier. Super sick. The album itself, though? It sucks, man. I will say it does not suck. In fact, Disciple is in my top 3 Slayer songs of all time. It's one of the coolest fucking songs. The chorus is so powerful, and the whole song is just thunderous. And if you've ever seen Slayer live, whenever they play this song, the crowd chants along with it, and it's super cool. But quite frankly, most of the album is just boring. Like, there's not a whole lot there. It's similar to Diabolus and Musica in a way, where it's not awful music. I just don't really have a lot to say on it. There's a lot of anger on God Hates Us All, which, hey, if you're like working out, or maybe you're just a pissed off teenager, or maybe you're just pissed off in general, you might throw this on, and it can alleviate some of that anger and hatred. But honestly, when I get down to it, the music of it is not it's not bad, but it's forgettable. There's some cool songs on here. I already mentioned Disciple, but I always kind of liked Here Comes the Pain and Warzone and Payback. Like, I can like some songs on here. Bloodline is pretty cool, but Exile and some of the other, you know, God Sent Death or something, nothing really special to me. I might be a little harsh on that album because, I don't know, I definitely liked it more when I was younger than I do now. But, you know, when I listen to this album, it almost turns into an EP where I'm kind of skipping a good amount of the songs to get to the ones I really want to hear. Now, this is for sure, in my opinion, this is Slayer's worst album. Christ Illusion, it's you know, it's not one of the worst metal albums ever made, but it falls into an even bigger problem with God Hates Us All. It falls into one of two things. It's just fast and angry. Now, that can have its place, but I really do feel like the songwriting on Christ Illusion is very, very run-of-the-mill. It feels like they were too afraid to venture off and maybe do something a little bit interesting. Maybe have some songs that took inspiration from South of Heaven, put them on here. Because frankly, I listened to this all the way through and I just wanted to go to sleep. It sounds great. The production's great. Some of the solos can be kind of cool, but for the most part, I really don't feel anything for Christ Illusion. It is a boring album. where, you know, there's just not much else to say. I like more songs from Diabolus and Musica and God Hates Us All than Christ Illusion. And, you know, like, I think that really has to be said. I also, you know, with Diabolus, I don't think it's the worst album ever, but I really remember it. I remember the album. I really don't remember much from Christ Illusion. Like, everybody, the one song that everybody knows is Jihad, which is about the 9/11 attacks from the terrorist perspective. And everybody, you know, kind of looked at that and they were just like, it seems like you're just trying to be edgy. You know, you're just trying to poke somebody, get a reaction. And nobody really cared about this song when it came out. That should tell you everything you need to know. Christ Illusion. Worst album by Slayer, but not the worst album of all time. This is, I think, where things might get interesting. So, World Painted Blood is... It's an A-tier album. I really do like World Painted Blood. It's definitely behind the first 5 albums, but I think this is what Slayer should be doing. Yes, they're still being fast and aggressive, but they're not afraid to dwell into more interesting ideas. 3 songs on here in particular, everybody talks about. It's Hate Worldwide, Playing with Dolls, and the title track. Those are like the 3 songs that everybody remembers from this record, and for good reason. They're great songs. But there's other cool songs on here, like Unit 731, Public Display of Dismemberment, and Beauty Through Order, which, if you haven't heard Beauty Through Order, you really, really should. It's one of Slayer's, it's a top 10 Slayer song. Sure, there's a couple forgettable songs on here. You know, American is one of those songs that I'm like, it's okay. But for the most part, I think this is a kick-ass record. And I think it gets shit on way too much. And I think people maybe they were hoping for just anger and brutality like there was on Christ Illusion or God Hates Us All. But frankly, Slayer is at its best when they have a nice mix of that ferocity along with something interesting, a little curveball here and there. Now we come to the final album, Repentless. When this first came out, I leading up to this album, I was heavily anticipating it because I had really liked what I heard on World Painted Blood before. Repentless, not a bad album. Kind of, but for me, it's in the middle. I like this album a lot. I think it is, it's got some interesting songs on it, like Cast the First Stone, Pride and Prejudice. The first time I heard When the Stillness Comes, I was kind of like, I don't know, it's okay. But when you hear it on this album in its entirety, it makes total sense why it should be there, and I've grown to really like a lot of Repentless. Yeah, there are some songs on here that are completely forgettable, like Take Control, and maybe something else that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But I always thought that Cast the First Stone was a pretty cool song. Vices was pretty interesting. Like I said, When the Stillness Comes, Pride and Prejudice. I also I know it's kind of unrelated, but I do like the Repentless music video. And I think it's a good time. I think that's all. I think that's all I have to say. I don't hate this tier list. A lot of people really look at the second half of Slayer's career with a bit of ire. And me personally, I don't. I really do believe that World Painted Blood is a really good album. I also really do like Repentless. And I think Divine Intervention gets a bad rap. I'm happy with this. If you're not happy with this, please let me know. If you are happy with this, also let me know down in the comments. I really do think that Slayer, overall, is not overrated. It's a fair thing to say that you know, the early days are the best. But I really do think that Slayer has some tricks up their sleeve, even in the later part of their career. Tell me down in the comments below. Until then, I'll see you guys later.